Yesterday, the city told us that they have escalated the desire to have more investigative powers for municipal police. This is something that Jordan Hill-Lewis has been trying to get through negotiation and consultation and conversation for some time. He said in a media statement that he'd made several attempts and he was being rebuffed at every turn, so he is using the legislative avenues available to him and declaring an official dispute. And that now constitutionally means that there has to be formal discussion around this and possibly even mediation. And if that fails, then an approach to the courts is the next step. And there is no doubt that policing in and around Cape Town is deeply flawed. The number of violent crimes, the number of murders, the inability to get on top of gangs and gang violence, testament to the inefficiencies of it. But does that automatically mean that if municipal metro police are doing it, J.P. Smith, when I spoke to him, said, yep, they've got this lineup of detectives being trained, detectives who were with SAPS and came out of SAPS with great experience and are waiting to get back into detecting and investigating, said absolutely it's going to make a difference. But Jean Redpath, senior researcher at the Dullah Omar Institute at the University of the Western Cape, is there enough evidence to, as a neutral or attempting to be dispassionate observer, to conclude that yes, it will definitely be better, rather than my attitude at the moment, which is, well, it can't be worse, so give it a try?
Well, I think we have to distinguish two things here. The first is what's possible constitutionally and legally. And the city may be jumping the gun at the moment in terms of what is possible in terms of the constitution and the legislation as it stands at the moment. Having said that, the kind of investigative powers in which it would make sense for the city to have them either delegated or assigned to them in terms of appropriate legislation would be the offences in which they are currently carrying out arrests, filling out charge sheets, and then taking the accused to the SAPS and then handing over the entire docket to the South African Police Service for further investigation and processing in the courts. That entire step of further investigation is involving people who were not involved in the original arrest and makes very little sense in how things operate in the moment. And what we've actually seen in practice is that once things are handed over, the city has to move heaven and earth to keep track of exactly what happens to those cases and exactly how they are processed in the courts. And in practice, we see that they are not properly processed, they tend to be withdrawn, and they tend not to be prosecuted. When or if the city were able to run that entire process to handing over to the prosecution service, they could more directly take responsibility for matters where they have been the primary arrestees and the primary processors of cases in which they are involved.
But isn't that a short-term issue? In the medium term, do we have faith that the investigative ability that they will put into the field will be of such a quality, and the management of that investigative ability will be of an operational efficiency that will mean more cases are successfully prosecuted in the courts?
Well, the international evidence is quite split on the idea of devolution. Now, devolution isn't something that appears anywhere in our constitution, but international studies have shown that this kind of taking over of investigative police powers at a closer level of government tends to only happen at a certain level of human development, which is at around the level of 6. The Western Cape and most of South Africa is over that level, so we can say, yes, it's something that could happen, but it tends to be successful with success being measured in terms of increased trust in police, people believing in police that they're doing a good job at a higher level of human development, and that is around the human development level of 8. Now, the Western Cape is at 7 point something on that human development level. So if we use the international evidence as a kind of a guide, we can say we're not sure if right now it would be the best move or not. Having said that, we know that in the SAPS, the detective service has really undergone a terrible deterioration over the last 10 to 15 years, with some detectives not even receiving any detective training. They are simply appointed as detectives. And that, by contrast, the city has put a lot of effort into training up both their ordinary people and their detectives. So it would be a very specific example, and it may not be something that would necessarily last if there were political change. So I think we have to distinguish to what, between what is generally a good idea, and the international evidence is not clear that it's always a good idea to go to the lower level. But in the South African context right now, it is true that the detective service is struggling. The South African Police Detective Service is struggling. And it is true that the city has put a great deal of effort in. However, that does not mean necessarily that they would do any better than the South African Police Service in actually bringing cases to conclusion.
Sorry, excuse me about the throat. But what are the potential downsides? To go back to, I do beg your pardon, to go back to what I originally said, they can't do any worse, so why not give them a shot? What are the potential downsides to the devolution and to saying to the city, okay, now you take it over, you've said you can do it better, here's your opportunity to prove it?
Well, there are lots of technical complications around data processing, keeping all the ducks in a row in terms of who's got a criminal conviction or not, and how all that processing works in the court. So it's not as simple as is often presented. The other potential downsides are sort of conflict between agencies. But what we've seen in other countries who have multi-levels, for example, Canada has local, provincial, and national, that tends to work really well because they're very clear delineations of responsibility. So it would work best if delineations of responsibility were clear, and which offences in which situations belong to whom. And those are the kinds of things that would have to be negotiated and sorted out for long-term success.
And I don't want to assign malign motives to the ANC, but there is fairly widespread belief that the ANC doesn't like the DA's success in the Western Cape, where the DA has successes. I was referring earlier to a new report from the FW, the Clark Foundation. The top 4 municipalities in the country, they say, are DA governed. The DA is by some distance the best governed metropolitan municipality in the country. And what would be the opportunities for the ANC, should they be instructed by the courts down the line to devolve some investigative powers to Metro Police, to make it difficult for Metro Police to do their jobs efficiently, so that the ANC can say, you see, we told you it wouldn't work and it's not working?
Well, I don't really have any insight as to whether that would happen. What I do know is that the Western Cape has battled the government, the police ministry in particular, and the South African Police Service for many years over the allocation of resources to, in particular, poor areas of the Western Cape where the allocations are below the median allocations. And that is extremely puzzling, especially in the light of a court case which now found that was an unequal allocation and that those areas shouldn't receive such very low allocations. But to ascribe a malign motivation to that is belied by
I'm not
the fact
asking you to comment on that. I'm just putting the fact on the table.
But so what happens is those bad allocations to poor areas which are populous tends to happen across the country, not just in the Western Cape, but it's particularly exacerbated in the Western Cape by the large differences between areas, and it's been brought to their attention in the Western Cape, and that is the part that has been puzzling, is the failure to act on the court case, on the political attention. The current minister, acting minister, Minister Kachalia, seems to be in earnest when he says he wants to help the Western Cape, but we've still not seen that kind of change happen. We've only seen the deployment of the army, which, contrary to popular perception, does seem to have had some sort of impact starting to show up in the data. But we need to have much more than that, and much more of a reform of how crime is dealt with, not only in the Western Cape, but in the country as a whole, and police.
She's gone. I'm sorry. Jean Redpath, thank you very much indeed. Slightly longer conversation than we normally have, but I think it's a very, very important topic for too many people in the Western Cape. Jean Redpath is with the Dullah Omar Institute at UWC.